Daredevil Born Again Season 1 is finally done. This was the continuation of the legacy of the Netflix series, and we had a journey with it. We had some highs.
The jury finds the defendant not guilty.
And we had some crushing lows. But did it all come together in the end? As my friend Frank Castle would say, let me tell you something. Hello again, everyone. Welcome back. My name's Amanda. You might know me as Vamp, and today we are here to talk about Daredevil Born Again Season 1. We are going to be talking about the entire season in this review. So while you have watched my episode reviews perhaps up to this point, or maybe you haven't watched those, if you'd like to, I will have a Daredevil Born Again playlist. You can check it out and see all of my reviews on each episode if you would like a more detailed description. But for this video, I'm just going to be breaking down how I feel about the show overall. But also, before we get into that, fair warning, obviously spoilers ahead. I will be talking about Season 1, which means we're going to get into some of the stuff that happened there. Although, I don't know how detailed I'm going to be, but I'm going to talk about where we went. So I'm going to warn you anyways, just in case. Let's do a little recap. So really, we come in here and Wilson Fisk, aka Kingpin, is turning over a new leaf. He wants to run to become mayor of New York. At the same time, Matt Murdock, who he once knew as Daredevil, has basically retired. He's hung up the mantle, and he has done this because he lost his friend Foggy Nelson, who was taken out by Bullseye, and so he's just trying to live his life as Matt Murdock and not put on the suit. Matt, don't put on the suit. And to that end, Matt actually promises Wilson in a meeting that he will not return to his old ways, as long as Wilson doesn't return to his old ways. And Wilson says, yeah, I'm moving on. And Daredevil says, yeah, I'm not going to be Daredevil anymore. And away we go. And then, of course, what happens throughout the show is that both of these characters have to wrestle with their violent nature and come to terms with the fact that the people that they're trying to evolve out of is actually just who they are. And so they kind of need to embrace that side of themselves. And through different ways, they have to reconcile with their own nature, who they are, and embrace that. And in the end, it, I think, makes both of them stronger. Matt actually gets to be happy and not feel like he's fighting against his own identity each day when he finally embraces being Daredevil again and just accepts that's part of who he is and that's how he fights for justice. And on Kingpin's side, he's actually not having as successful as a time as mayor following all the rules, and he realizes for him to do it the way that he feels it needs to be done, he actually has to go back to his more criminal roots, and so that's where we kind of end up with him. Now, of course, there's a lot of other players, there's a lot of other story arcs that come into this. There is White Tiger, there is Muse, so there are things that happen along the way, but all of them kind of serve to evolve these two main characters and take us on a journey through their stories. When the season ends, we kind of end off with a standoff here. Wilson has now pretty much taken over the city. He and Vanessa are reunited after having some marital troubles, and they are on the road to just conquering and dominating New York completely. They've introduced martial law. It's pretty crazy. At the same time, Daredevil has come back together with Karen Page. He's also reconnected with the Punisher and teamed up with the Punisher. He's donning his suit again, and he has decided that he is not going to let Kingpin take his city, and he is going to bring his own group of people together to fight back, finally returning to Daredevil proper. That's a gist of what happens. Obviously, there's other stuff. I will say that the thing I really appreciate about this story is that when it comes to the comic book influences, it takes so much inspiration from so many different runs. There's Chip Zdarsky's run. There's obviously, it's called Daredevil Born Again. There's some Frank Miller in there. There's Soule's run, Charles Soule. That's where Muse is from. Brian Michael Bendis, which is all the Hector Ayala, the White Tiger stuff, although they did some different things with it. There's classic Daredevil with Heather Glenn. Like, we're all over the place here. And I kind of love it because I feel like it works. I feel like they made it work. And the other thing that I like is, as someone that is more familiar with the comics than maybe some other people would be, I don't know what to expect from it. I have theories, I have ideas, but are they right? No, not necessarily. And I like that. I like that it keeps me on my toes and it makes things feel fresh while still honoring the legacy of what has come before. Ultimately, when it comes to adaptations, that's my favorite way to do it. Give me something new, but also honor the past. And I think the show is doing a good job of that. I think the other thing that we have to talk about is how does it honor the past of the Netflix series? So obviously the Netflix series had 3 seasons, and the interesting thing with this show being called Born Again is that season 3 really was the Netflix show's version of Born Again. So I do feel that it's interesting that that's the title, but at the same time, I feel like everyone working on the show tried to not run through the same points as season 3 and really bring their own story to it, which is also why I think it takes more influence in terms of the overarching story, especially the stuff happening with Wilson Fisk from Devil's Reign, which is from Chip Zdarsky's run, and that is the run in which Fisk becomes mayor. However, they still took some influences from Born Again. We still had things like the apartment being blown up, and we still had, Matt questioning like who he was and not being happy and having to kind of come to terms with the fact that in order to be happy, he didn't actually need all these trappings of his life. He just had to boil it down to the basics of who he is, what he fights for, and being Daredevil ultimately. So there's a lot of themes that still play into Born Again, and there are still events that happen that reminded me of Born Again, which is cool. The pacing, I would say overall for this story was not perfect, but I didn't really mind it at the same time. One thing that I think is that I just feel it was disjointed because of the way it was filmed, but at the same time, we can't really change that. We had an original team that was brought in, and then Disney and Marvel realized this is not a good idea. What are we doing? And they decided to go the other way with it. Basically, fan backlash, cast backlash, I think they were also getting. And so they decided to pivot, which was a good choice. It does mean that the season feels a bit disjointed, but the other team was brought in to take what they had of the stuff that was originally filmed and make it work and make something new that was ideally better. And I think they succeeded. So it's like the pacing kind of is a product of that in some ways. The other thing that I feel is that the pacing is kind of cool because it reminds me of a comic book. So we kind of are introduced in episode 1 to this overarching story of Foggy's death and what happened with that and the ramifications of that. And then each story that we get the White Tiger story, we get kind of the Muse story, feels like an arc that you would have in a ongoing series. And then we also have even things like little one-off stories, which you also get a lot of the times in ongoing series. These little kind of just single story adventures, like one issue, a cool story happens, and then that's the end of that story. Like the bank robbery episode on St. Patrick's Day. And then in the end, it brings back the Foggy story with the last few episodes. So I kind of like that it felt that way, but I do feel that there's something missing there. I'm going to talk about my critiques at the end and where I think that could have been improved, but it's interesting. It's kind of cool how it feels like a comic book. And I would say that overall, the connective tissue of this story is less like one plot through line, although there are elements of that, and it's really more focusing on the character development. So the good news is every story that we have, whether it's a few episodes together, or whether it's one, or whether it's we're talking the overarching stuff, is that it's all there to service the characters and to build and evolve the characters and take them through the journey of this story and see how that affects them and changes them. And that is something that I think it does pretty well. That being said, let's talk about some of the acting in this show, because man, people are acting here. They are acting. It's so good. I think the standouts for me in terms of the acting are definitely the Daredevil and Punisher scenes that we got. That one argument that Daredevil and Punisher have when Matt comes to visit him with the bullet casing, and Frank just straight up calls him out as not being okay and being in denial. And the fact that Foggy's death is really hurting him in a way that he can't even acknowledge. And Frank compares it to the loss of his kids. That whole scene is award-winning. It is such a good scene, and I want to act in that scene. That's how good the scene is. Just so good. I just want to live in that scene. And getting to see Jon Bernthal and Charlie Cox act opposite each other again in Daredevil has been such a treat for me. Everything that they do. Also, just Punisher calling him Nightgown Man. I mean, it's perfect. It's just perfect. They're not the only ones, though, that I love. I also really love the Fisks, Vanessa Fisk and Wilson Fisk. And I wasn't sure we were going to end up with these two. And the thing that I really love about Ayelet Zurer's Vanessa, and also that I love about Vincent D'Onofrio's Wilson, is that their characters that are so clear in who they are, but there are times where you don't know what they're going to do. They feel dangerous because they feel unpredictable. And even when I think I know them, I'm questioning if I really know what's motivating them at all times. And it's not because the actors don't understand their characters. I don't think it has anything to do with that. It's not a criticism. It's actually, I think, playing with a bit of the mystery and the secrecy of these characters, and the fact that the characters are dangerous, so they always kind of feel a little bit unpredictable. Getting to see these two powerhouses of crime come back together and just bring out the best of the worst in each other. They just are so good at making the other person more violent or evil. I'm so glad they brought back Ayelet Zurer, because when I heard that they were going to replace Vanessa, that was the thing I heard. I don't know if it was true or if it was just a rumor, but I thought, what a freaking mistake, because she was so good as Vanessa in the Netflix show and still is. And I gotta say, I know they're criminals. I know that it's messed up, but I root for Wilson and Vanessa. I think their relationship is kind of beautiful. Even though they are two evil people, the relationship ends up being like one of the more healthy ones, which I always think it's so funny when villains have healthier relationships than their heroes. But hey, here we are. They dealt with their stuff, you know? They buried their issues. They got rid of that. They took it out to the back, and they took care of that. So stronger than ever, and I love to see it. I also want to shout out Heather Glenn, played by Margarita Levieva. I just feel like she brought like a depth to the cast that I wasn't necessarily expecting, but her relationship with Matt and the disappointment that we feel through her in the fact that she just wants to connect with this person who she loves, but he's really got a wall around him. It's just really sad, honestly. And I thought she did a great job. Everything that she had with her scene with Muse, where her life is being threatened and all of that is happening, was just felt so grounded and so believable. I really feel like Margarita Levieva was a surprising standout for me. And I wasn't expecting to like be super here for Heather Glenn, but hey, I'm here for Heather Glenn. I think she's an interesting character. I like that they changed her up from the comics and kind of did something a little bit different with her. I like that she's, you know, basically a therapist. I think that's a cool angle. Also, obviously, I wish that we got more of Deborah Ann Woll. I love Deborah Ann Woll. I just love seeing her in everything. I've loved her since True Blood, I think, was the first thing I saw her in. I loved her there as Jessica, and I still love her today as Karen Page, and just in everything. I have never met Deborah, but I know people that know her, and she just seems like such a delightful person as well. And I would love, a dream of mine would definitely be to play some Dungeons and Dragons with Deborah at some point. So maybe one day that'll happen, because I feel like that would be really fun. And she's just such a cool nerd. I love it. So hopefully we will get more Karen Page in season 2. Clearly this season was a little bit light, but it also made sense for the fact that, you know, Matt isn't really Daredevil and he's kind of in denial. And I feel like Karen's waiting for him to come to terms with himself. And if this story is like Born Again, then Matt will probably end back up with Karen Page. That's what happens in the Daredevil Born Again story in the comic, and it felt like they were building a little bit towards that near the end of this season. So fingers crossed, because I ship that. I ship the heck out of that. Sorry, Heather, but you can't compete with Karen and Matt. You just can't. There are also some really great fights. We do get that sort of hallway-esque fight at the beginning of the show, which some people did not like. I think that comes down to a little bit more of a personal preference for people, which I totally respect. But I think it's interesting because that fight, although it doesn't have as many external factors as like the hallway fight in the first season of Netflix, there's still a lot going on with it. I like the pacing of it. I like how brutal it is. And I think there's still a lot to love there. Now, where I think it differs from that first hallway scene, if we kind of were just to compare those two, is that in the hallway scene, there are so many characters that are involved in that fight with Daredevil. Whereas this fight that we get in Born Again season 1 at the top is really just Daredevil and Bullseye, and then people getting pulled into the fight that are more collateral damage. So the fight becomes more about how these two face off against each other, the exhaustion that they feel in between these spurts of energy, and Daredevil just trying to protect as many people as he can, because anytime they're around anyone, he now knows that that's a new victim for Bullseye. And it's also personal. It's a very personal fight for Matt, because now he's not just fighting to, you know, save someone because he's the hero. He's literally fighting because his best friend was just shot. And there's a lot of emotion in that fight that I felt, which I liked quite a bit. I think it's interesting because a lot of people have also been talking about the choreography in Daredevil Born Again and saying that it's not as well choreographed as some of the Netflix stuff was, which I also feel like is an interesting criticism. I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong or anything like that, but I don't really see that. I think the choreography is good. Sometimes the cinematography doesn't capture what it should be capturing. I think the cinematography could sometimes be a little bit cleaner for some of the fights. And I will say that I think it's just the fight and the purpose and what it's serving that some people just don't feel as much. I think it's just the scenarios that people prefer more with some of the other fights. Not to say that it means that it can't be different, but the stunt coordinator is the same stunt coordinator that we had, I believe, for season 1 and season 2, which is Philip Silvera. Philip Silvera worked on season 1 and on season 2, and I believe did a lot of stunts there and worked on the coordination, and is also the person that's doing it here again. So if you liked season 1 and season 2, it should reason that you would like Born Again. However, you know, that's not always the case, and obviously there are things that can change, but I think it's mostly the setups from the story that really create the issues that people have, which is reasonable. I don't think it's fair, though, to call out the choreo, because I think the choreo is actually pretty good. However, if you disagree with me, you know, let me know what are some moments in the choreography that you feel like didn't hit for you and why it didn't work, because I'd love to discuss further. I love stunts and I love stunt choreography, and I've done a bit of stunt training myself, and I just find it to be such a fascinating part of the craft of filmmaking. It's so important, and there is so much more to it than people think. It's not just like big explosions and like punch guy in face. There's so much storytelling that you can really do with a good fight scene. So I love that stuff. A quick note on cinematography. I would just like to say that although I feel like the cinematography didn't always work the best for some of the fight scenes, and there were moments where it was stronger and weaker, I think just in general, some of the cinematography in here is some of the best that I've seen in Daredevil. I really like some of the more artistic shots. I really like how they played with the lighting a lot as well in this show, and it's just beautiful. It honestly is like you could take a still of it and hang it on a wall levels of cinematography at times. And I would also say that in regards to some of the set deck that we actually get on this production, I think is quite good. The music as well. The music really sets the tone for a lot of the show. So music is very important when it comes to movies and TV. And not only are we talking about the music that's happening, you know, underneath people talking and action scenes and all that, which is also great, and the intro credits, but we also just need to talk about some of the tracks that were featured here, because there were some really, really good ones. I actually really like this soundtrack, which is great. I love when the music just hits, and it is an important part to telling a story. You know, honestly, some of the soundtrack for this, you know what it reminded me of? Boardwalk Empire. And I know that's random. That's probably random as all heck, me saying that. I don't mean in terms of the style necessarily. I just mean in terms of how well I felt some of the music really fit the vibe and the tone of the series, if that makes sense. So do with that what you will. All right, that's all I have to say about the things that I really loved and why I feel like it worked. So now let's talk about some of the things that could have been better. Number one, the CGI. And I know that a lot of you have probably been waiting for me to talk about the CGI. Now, what I will say about the CG is I think it's there to serve the purpose of really showing how heightened Daredevil is. You know, we get it off the bat in that first episode and Daredevil swinging around. And while it does look a little bit fake, it also feels like things are elevated because of that. It feels like we're almost at a supernatural plane in terms of Daredevil's powers, even though at the end of the day, Daredevil is very much a street level hero. And what that means is that Daredevil is really on the streets, he's scrapping with people. He's not like flying and blasting lasers from his eyes. He's not rearranging matter. He is very ground level when it comes to what he can do. But we're really seeing him, I think, at the top of his game, which is where the CG comes into play. And I think a lot of it serves to highlight those elements and the capability of Daredevil. Now, whether or not it always succeeds in terms of also looking good, that is questionable, but I do think it's there for a reason. And I also feel that people that are critiquing the CG and saying that, you know, they never should have added it, it's been like Disney-ified because it is CG, is also not acknowledging the fact that the Netflix show had a way lower budget in comparison to this Disney Plus series. And people that have worked on the Netflix series have literally said that they would have loved to do some of these things. They simply could not, so they had to come up with other solutions. They had to get a little creative because they had to work within their means. Now, granted, some people might just prefer that because honestly, when you limit budgets and when you limit people, it does push them to more creative places. So that's a preference. If you prefer something that has a lower budget or has more challenges because you think the work is better, I get that, and I would honestly, in most cases, agree with you that struggle is what ultimately leads to good art. Conflict is what leads to good art. However, there are people that are literally saying that like Disney just didn't care and didn't put as much into this, and that's why it doesn't look as good as Netflix, and that Netflix put more into it, and that's just simply not correct in terms of the budgets, in terms of just like money that we're talking about. Netflix had less, Disney has more, and that's why they're doing more. However, you might just wish that they didn't do more, which is fair. But the people that worked on the Netflix show have literally said that's what they would have liked to do. So it wasn't a choice that they made to not do it. They simply could not. They simply could not do it. Hopefully in season 2, the CG gets worked on even more and it gets better, because I don't think the CG is out of place necessarily, but I definitely think it could use some work. So I hear ya. I hear ya. Number 2, I want to say that I think, I talked about this a little bit earlier. I do think there's a disjointed nature to the series. I do think that will be fixed with season 2. I do think that's also why some things felt a little bit convenient to me in plots, just in terms of how quick things had to move, because we're trying to fit in all of these stories. And because of that, you're kind of sometimes moving through things quickly. Granted, there is a suspension of disbelief I have, like, Matt finding out about Heather at the same time that the cops are getting there and zooming across town just as Heather's being targeted by Muse. That's all kind of convenient timing, but it's building to a moment in the story that's dramatic. It's creating drama. It serves a purpose. And so even though, the police figuring out who she is and all this stuff happening around the same time feels convenient, I can suspend my disbelief, which I think you should do for fictional stories anyways, especially for superhero stories, but also just in general. Like, it's fiction. Just enjoy the ride. But what I would love to see more next season in terms of this disjointed nature is I'd love to see it smoothed out a bit, and I'd love to see us just focus more on a through line and have that build each episode a little bit more consistently, which I think the show didn't do as well. I think it could be better, and I think the Netflix show did it better, to be honest with you, in comparison to this Disney Plus series. However, that's not to say that Disney is the one that ruined that, because Disney is capable of doing that with a series. I mean, they did it with WandaVision, they did it with Loki, and more recently, I would say they did it pretty well with Agatha All Along, where each episode was really building a main story, but also it felt episodic at the same time. So they're capable of doing it. Hopefully with season 2, we'll get more of that. Ultimately, season 1 is kind of like a primer for season 2, because the new team came in and they kind of took what they could from what was already done, and then they added in their own stuff and tried to make it as good as they possibly can. But you can clearly tell that there's a bit of a divide between what the original team had planned, actually a pretty big divide between what the original team had planned, I would say, and what the new team had planned, and then had to kind of make use of what they got. And I think really they're using season 1 to set up everything that they really want to do in season 2. So season 2 will really be more of this team's story as they would like it to be seen. However, I also feel like they did a good job with preserving some of the stuff that did work from the original team, which is kind of nice, because I don't think everything that team was doing was necessarily garbage. I just think the direction overall was not the right direction for the show. And the other thing that I like about the name Daredevil Born Again for this, even though it's not really the Daredevil Born Again story point blank, is that it's like a return to form. Daredevil Born Again in the comics, that's what it represents for Matt and Daredevil, this return to form for the character. And with the new team coming in, it's like they brought us back to the return to form for the Netflix series a little bit more. So it kind of has a weird, like, symbolic meaning a little bit to me in terms of just the creation of this show, and how the show started out as being something that wanted to do something different with Matt that kind of missed the point of what the original Netflix series was doing, and then the new team kind of brought it back to form, which is what Daredevil Born Again is all about in terms of the character of Daredevil in the comics. Pretty cool. That's all I have for this one. I would say my overall rating for the season would be a 4 out of 5. Very solid. I think there is still room for improvement, but I think they really did a great job with, especially with what they were given, and I really had a great time and enjoyed it. There were a lot of great moments, and I cannot wait to sit down to dinner with Matt and the cons and just have Matt meet Kamala. It's gonna be so fun. Just have Matt meet all of the cons. It's gonna be a party, man. So yeah, let me know your thoughts on this season down in the comments below. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why not? And I'll see you in the next one. If you missed it, I also just recently did a reaction on Fantastic Four First Steps. Guys, there is so much to talk about in this trailer, and I cannot contain my feelings. So please check it out. I'll see you next time, and until then, friends, stay nerdy.